really too monumental to sum up to many of the others of you who are not familiar with the issues. And really, we weren't intending to solve world peace today here. We were hoping to bring people together with similar interests. We had no intention of winning anybody over to one particular side or another. There's no right or wrong answer. We just have a bunch of problems that need to be addressed, and we all have various ways and means which we think those should be addressed. So with that, I'm here to talk about icebergs. In more ways than one, the aviation industry is a lot like an iceberg. There's a whole lot more to it than the little wee bit you see floating around on the ocean surface. Often people make assumptions about the size, the composition, the integrity, the direction and speed the iceberg is traveling, and what effect, if any, those things might have on their personal safety. Kind of like the assumptions many of you will make, and likely did make, when you see this uniform. For most people, this uniform equates to the aviation industry. You very likely expect to see some variation of this uniform as you climb on board WestJet or Air Canada to travel from Vancouver to Montreal, Toronto to Ottawa, Canada to Australia or New Zealand for a holiday. If you're like most people as you climb on board that nice shiny jet, which you likely and correct to assume to be new, you might idly make further assumptions as you watch the cabin crew ready the aircraft for departure and wait for the remaining passengers to take their seats. You assume the flight crew is properly licensed, fully trained, well rested, and have all the required equipment to do their respective jobs, and most importantly, have the safety of the entire aircraft first and foremost in their minds as they plan the flight. You assume the cabin crew is properly rested, trained, and has all the required equipment to do their respective jobs, and most importantly will have your personal comfort first and foremost in their minds as they bring you your free coffee in little bags of bits and bytes. If you bother to lend it any thought, you might assume the people who maintain the aircraft are properly licensed, fully trained, well rested, and have the required equipment to do their respective jobs, and most importantly did not throw out that really important bolt which was left over when they reassembled the engine or the landing gear. As you taxi out towards the runway, you assume that the people in the control tower way off in the distance are properly licensed, fully trained, well rested, and have the required equipment to do their respective jobs, and will safely coordinate all the aircraft coming and going so that none of them will collide. As the aircraft accelerates down the runway and you watch the overhead bins and cabin walls come alive in a loud vibrating flare of activity, which you hope will not fly apart into a million pieces, you assume that because nothing really traumatic happened the last 6 times you flew, you'll probably make it. Besides, your friends and family fly all the time, and they made it, didn't they? And if flying was really dangerous or unsafe, you'd have heard about it in the media, wouldn't you have? And finally, when you arrive at your destination and find yourself in the arms of your loved ones or at the mercy of your boss, you assume that all the big, shiny, new jets will continue safely coming and going until the next time you need to cross the country, the continent, or the hemisphere. But most importantly, as you breathe a sigh of relief and watch the airport fade away in your rearview mirror, and you're satisfied with your journey because you arrived in one piece. Deep down, you know you didn't really risk your life because at the end of the day, you know the federal government, that Transport Canada, watches over you. You know that if anything was amiss in the aviation industry, if there were any problems with the operators, the aircraft, the pilots, the flight attendants, the mechanics, the air traffic control system, or even the regulatory agency itself, you'd hear about it in the news, wouldn't you? Well, maybe you did read a string of articles a year or so ago in the Toronto Star about near misses in the air traffic system. Maybe you did read something about that jet that ran off an icy runway in Toronto or Vancouver. And there was something to do with, on page 5 of the Globe and Mail, a small aircraft in a place called Nunavut. And then there was that big helicopter tragedy on the coast of Newfoundland. But then some guy in a suit from Transport Canada was recently quoted by the media saying we have the safest industry in the world. Surely the government wouldn't lie to us, would they? Now I'd like to talk a little bit more about the iceberg and how your perceptions of what you think and you see in front of you might be incorrect. As Dennis pointed out, my name is Kirsten Brazier and I'm a professional pilot, not an airline pilot. I hold an airline transport license for airplanes in both Canada and the United States. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the structure of pilot licensing, an airline transport license is the highest license you can achieve. With this license, I'm qualified to fly any civilian aircraft operating in this country. With this license, I'm qualified to fly any aircraft in this country as a captain. Of course, I might need an hour or two of familiarization before I climbed into a Boeing 737 and drove you all to Vancouver. I also hold a commercial helicopter license, which allows me to fly a helicopter in a commercial air service. And Dennis has told you I've been in the industry for 17 years, so I won't bore you with all that. But mostly my experience is flying what you would call bush planes. I've operated on wheels, floats, and skis all over Canada. And I've flown what is called IFR, which is flying with reference to instruments when the weather is bad, and VFR, which is flying with reference to the ground and what you see out the window. Sometimes that weather is bad too, but the rules are different from getting from A to B. And I flew briefly overseas. And as Dennis mentioned, I've been chief pilot and ops manager, and I've been on the management and operational side as a partner in an air taxi business. And there's a lot of things I'd like to say about that, but I think it's more important that we all address our points of interest, and I would hope some people would ask about the problems that I experienced as we get into the discussion. The type of flying that interests me and has kept me engaged in the industry is, and contrary to your perception, the largest sector of aviation in Canada. These are the air taxis, the aerial work, and the commuter sectors of aviation. These are all what you would call the little airplanes that feed all the big planes. These are all the specialty services, such as those that transport tourists to fishing lodges, injured people to hospitals, and workers to various service sector jobs. Hydro, telephone, district court services. They bring food and freight to northern communities and even transport many of your members of parliament to their constituents up north. And Dennis is an example of this type of MP we met in Inuvik. This industry also includes helicopters, which transport all manner of weird and wonderful people and bits of equipment to places where no aircraft can land, and often not even the helicopter. Which you may not realize living in large urban centers, that this is only a small sampling of what is the true industry in this country. And I'm afraid I must further destroy your perceptions. This industry is not as safe as you think. In truth, and the reason we are here today is that this very day, big shiny jets are traveling from one end of the country under something called safety management systems. Surely a transportation safety system with the word safety in it must be a good thing. Years ago, Transport Canada realized the industry was growing in leaps and bounds at a far greater rate than their budget could accommodate oversight for. Something had to be done to regain control over standards in the industry. Upper management started planning ways to download responsibility onto industry and reduce the liability of their office, and unfortunately, Transport Canada's accountability for their actions. Then enter ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, which is an international organization of states cooperating together under something called the Chicago Convention, originally signed in 1944 by 52 member states and which has now grown to 190 member states trying to cooperate. Their stated mandate is that it works to achieve its vision of safe, secure, and sustainable development of civil aviation through cooperation amongst its member states. ICAO members came up with the idea of safety management systems, a system of risk and hazard analysis which aims to change the very safety culture of a company from the top down. It is a system which aims to groom each member state and turn each aviation company within that state to a system of self-repair. This is where a system of checks and balances, a member state or company identifies its weaknesses within and aims to correct them before any problems or accidents result. Transport Canada was delighted. Finally, a way to overcome financial liability and burden of regulation and oversight in an industry too big for its britches.